So, dear colleagues, welcome back. I'd like to thank once again everyone for coming. But now let's get started with the conference program. It is my great pleasure to welcome Naja Bentzen as the keynote speaker at the European and North American Encyclopedia Conference in Zagreb. Naja is a senior policy analyst in the European Parliament Liaison Office in Washington, D.C., and currently a resident fellow at the German Marshall Fund, US, and George Mason University. Before coming to Washington, Naja worked in the European Parliamentary Research Service with a focus on disinformation-related issues. Naja is well known to our community, of course, as she was the author of the in-depth analysis of the European online encyclopedia ecosystem, which resulted in a document entitled Europe's Online Encyclopedia, Equal Access to Knowledge of General Interest in a Post-Truth Era, published in 2018. This document emphasizes the importance of encyclopedias, that is, the importance of public access to sources of trustworthy general interest knowledge in the post-truth era. Today, Naja will give a talk, Knowledge Supply Chains in an Age of Truth Decay, the Role of Verified Encyclopedias. Naja, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Natasha, for your kind welcome remarks. Thank you also to Bruno and to Philip, for all of you, for organizing this very important conference at a crucial time. Thank you also to the Croatian Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs for supporting it. And also thank you for your inspiring words at the beginning of the conference. I think that especially the quote by Umberto Eco about the internet being good for the rich, but potentially not so good for the poor in terms of access to knowledge is a very, very important lesson. I'm honored and I'm happy and I'm also very excited to be here with all of you today, both those of you who are here in person and those who are participating online. And I'll start with a disclaimer and say that everything that I say today is my own opinion. It's not the official position of the European Parliament. Thanks to you at the Miroslav Krliča Institute of Lexicography, we have the honor to be visiting this beautiful castle of accumulated collective knowledge and cultural heritage. It feels like almost like a sanctuary in a time of uncertainty, in a time when the pressure on our democratic infrastructure, including our information ecosystem, is mounting, where the quantity of available information online is skyrocketing, but the quality of the knowledge that people can access is diluted at a similar pace. And the threats to our information sphere is just one dimension of the current challenges to democracy. Just like your building is a recognizable and integral component of Zagreb's architecture, the knowledge that you provide and make accessible is a landmark in the knowledge infrastructure of your language community and your country. Here and now, we feel safe, I think, between the solid walls and surrounded by knowledge. But we all know that that might not necessarily protect us against the rising tides of diluted and sometimes even deceptive information that continues to wash over Europe, over North America, and over the rest of the world. So thank you for inviting me to speak about what I think is the most important topic of our time, how to handle the ongoing challenge of truth decay, a notion that was coined in 2018 by the RAND Corporation, and that captures 4 related trends: growing disagreement about facts, secondly, blurred lines between opinion and fact, thirdly, increasing influence of opinion over fact, and fourthly, declining trust in formally respected sources of factual information. These trends are all linked to the strategic and systemic information disorder that is currently undermining our public space for debate. We in this room today are not the only ones who are concerned about truth decay. 7 out of 10 people across 19 countries in Europe and in North America and in the Asia-Pacific region see the spread of false information online as a major threat, according to a recent survey by Pew Research Center. It actually was not the top concern. It only came second. The top concern was climate change. And when I say that information manipulation is the most important challenge of our times, it's not because I don't take the climate emergency seriously. It's because if we're not able to agree on facts, if our knowledge and information supply chains are disrupted to an extent where we no longer base our decisions on facts, but where we create separate sets of alternative facts to underpin our opinions, then we cannot solve any of the key challenges that we are facing today, and that includes climate change, and it also includes the current pandemic and potential future pandemics. 3 years ago, at the reception in the European Parliament, I used my phone as a metaphor for the challenges that our information sphere is facing in a digital age. I used the image of the mirror of Erised in Harry Potter, which shows, quote unquote, not your face, but your heart's desire. Erised is a palindrome, desire spelled backwards. Der Spiegel Nahegeb in German, speilet mørkt in Norwegian, and mørkt spiegeln in Swedish. The mirror was created with good intentions, but because it reflects exactly what people want, they get lost in it. It's addictive. It sucks you in. I use the mirror of Erised as a metaphor for the attention economy that dominates our personal and collective access to information, to news, and to knowledge. With our phones as a key window to the world, a fata morgana where the algorithmic curation shows users what they want to see and what benefits the online platform of their choice, of course. My particular mirror of Erised, in the meantime, has actually started to splinter. I can show you later if you're interested, and I just haven't had the time to fix it. But that reminds me, also partly inspired by this beautiful building, this fairy tale castle of a fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen, where a splinter of a magical mirror, a malign magical mirror, created for entertainment purposes, pierces the eye of a young boy and disrupts and distorts his view of the world by magnifying everything that is ugly and bad. And the splintered mirror in the fairy tale about the Snow Queen is, of course, also a metaphor for our current window to the world, where the online platform's algorithmic curation favors divisive content over facts and knowledge. It amplifies content that triggers emotion, and we know that negative emotions tend to trump positive ones in the online world. Outrage, hate, fear, shock, horror, disgust generate most engagement, clicks, and likes and shares. The image of a splintered mirror also captures the fragmentation of our infosphere. You tend to connect with like-minded only. You tend to stay within your own tribe. The fragmentation is further exacerbated by the economic pressure on formally trusted sources of information. The shifting ad markets has led to a decline of traditional news media, including the widespread death of local news, which used to be the glue of local communities. And the same is true for traditional providers of knowledge, including encyclopedias, some of whom have been struggling to survive in the digital era, as we discussed in Brussels 3 years ago. So our realities are not only distorted, they are also fragmenting to an extent where we often don't agree on basic facts anymore. And the public debate that underpins democracy suffers from the lack of glue that binds the cognitive fabric of our societies together: shared facts, shared references, shared realities. Now let's look at the realities that we share, despite our different backgrounds and our different nationalities. Winter is coming, not only in the cautionary fairy tale about the Snow Queen. The cold reality has dawned on us, or is dawning on us, on both sides of the Atlantic in a number of ways. On a practical level, the mornings are getting chilly. Winter is coming, literally, and we are learning the hard way that our energy infrastructure is vulnerable. The geostrategic, systemic rivalry between democracy and authoritarianism has unveiled a new and chilling reality in international relations and on the ground in our houses and apartments, in our houses of democracy, and in our castles of knowledge, in our information sphere. Ukraine has been on the forefront of the hybrid battle between authoritarianism and democracy at least since 2014, and Ukrainians are currently fighting two wars at the same time, one on the ground and one in the collective cognitive space. Putin's war on Ukraine aims not only to conquer territory, it's a war on facts, it's a war on knowledge, it's a war on cultural heritage, on collective memory, physical archives, libraries, museums. It's a war on Ukraine's history and even the Ukrainian language. In the battle between democracy and authoritarianism, knowledge has become a key battleground. And the world has changed in several ways since we met in Brussels 3 years ago, and we will discuss that in a panel later today. So I hope I'm not preempting anything. So I will list 3 developments that touch upon the different topics of the panels during this conference, but hopefully, as I said, don't preempt any of the discussions. These 3 developments have increased the sense of urgency to protect and strengthen our information ecosystems on both sides of the Atlantic: the infodemic, the political situation in the United States, and thirdly, as I have already mentioned, Russia's war on Ukraine. So based on these developments, I look at some of the components of what I call our knowledge supply chains that could and should be boosted further to help strengthen our information sphere, the public space for debate that should enable us to form our opinions, which is part of freedom of expression, and to make informed choices. And that includes you, of course. And then I have been told that there is a little bit of time where we can look ahead potentially and maybe discuss what the next 3 years could bring for you and for the knowledge communities that you represent. So let's start with the 3 key developments from the past 3 years. The already known problem of information overload and massive amounts of mis- and disinformation was accelerated by the pandemic, which fueled our fear, our uncertainty. It increased inequality because many people lost their jobs. The lockdowns also contributed to isolation and loneliness, which we know can make people more vulnerable to extremist messaging. At the same time, many people spent much more time online, including on social media, and all this created a dangerous cocktail which made the World Health Organization warn that the pandemic had been accompanied by an infodemic, defined as an overabundance of information, some accurate and some not, that makes it hard for people to find trustworthy sources and reliable guidance when they need it. Many people changed their consumption of online information, with young people increasing their consumption of videos by 51% and their consumption of video games by 31% during March and April 2020 alone. And I look forward to hearing more about your experience later today. looking at the role of online platforms, which are under increasing pressure, including from the European Union, to make trustworthy and authoritative information findable. And that's a challenge we will discuss tomorrow. One key lesson from the infodemic, for me, is that even in the eye of the perfect storm, there was authoritative information available that the platforms, in many different languages, that the platform could make findable. That included WHO itself, as well as national health authorities that all play a role in knowledge supply chains, defined as a network of resources, technology, and individuals involved in the creation and distribution of knowledge. So I'm not claiming that it was an easy job for the online platforms to navigate the infodemic or help us navigate the infodemic. Anti-vax conspiracy theories, some of them originating from the US, spread across the world, and they continue to spread today and continue to hamper the vaccine rollout, including in the US. But still, there were credible sources available in many different languages that the platforms could make findable. That is completely different, of course, when it comes to divisive political wedge issues that are being used to pit people against each other. And that takes me to the second development that I want to highlight. I mentioned conspiracy theories originating from the US, and I mentioned the 4 trends of the notion of truth decay, all of which are playing out in the US right now. And in addition, the US is a very good example of the blurring lines between domestic and foreign disinformation actors, where domestic actors take over narratives of the Kremlin, for example, and vice versa. It can be difficult. It's notoriously difficult to measure the impact of information manipulation and truth decay, but you can see some of the results in the US, including in the context of the attack on the US Capitol on January 6, 2021, which was a direct result of the big lie about a stolen election. Violent political speech and physical violence are on the rise. And we are seeing attacks on not only election workers, but in the context of the ongoing culture war, also on libraries, librarians that offer books about racism and LGBTQ people. The third lesson is that China and Russia, which were both under enormous pressure to defend their systems during the pandemic, have cooperated much more closely to weaken democracies and to undermine our information sphere. Right now, it's about convincing the world that the West is to blame for the food crisis, for example, that Putin has sparked with his war on Ukraine. Both Russia and China are using a network of state-sponsored foreign-facing media outlets that they have invested in the past years, including in Latin America and in Africa. Authoritarian state actors also use academia, our universities, to influence research and to spread their narratives. And at the same time, they have devoted significant resources to manipulating Wikipedia articles, for example, to make them fit their narratives, or harassing or threatening users that don't toe to the official line of their respective regimes. After the invasion of Ukraine, Russia threatened to ban Wikipedia for publishing prohibited materials and fake content about the war over the Russian language article about the invasion of Ukraine. And the result of that threat was that downloads of Russian Wikipedia grew by 4,000% in the first half of March compared to early January. And ironically, that made Russia the country with the most Wikipedia downloads worldwide. In July, the Russian media regulator ordered search engines to mark Wikipedia as a violator of Russian laws. And that makes Wikipedia not only contested territory, but it makes it an explicit danger zone. All this is strong testimony to the power of shared knowledge. As we know, both China and Russia have invested significant resources in their own encyclopedias. The Encyclopedia of China, which they called the Great Wall of Culture, and the great Russian encyclopedia, which they refer to as the territory of truth. And in addition to that, in August, Russian authorities launched another Russian alternative to Wikipedia called Universalis, using Wikipedia's freeware so it looks like Wikipedia, and drawing on what they say are former Russian language Wikipedia editors. Universalis, of course, offers only the official Kremlin line about the war on Ukraine. So these are three different developments from the past 3 years that show the importance of knowledge supply chains and show how different components of our knowledge supply chains are being targeted. I've only mentioned a few of them. I've mentioned libraries and librarians, news media, including local news, public broadcasters, including foreign-facing public broadcasters, universities and academias, and encyclopedias. And last, of course, but not least, the online platforms have played a key part in enabling the decay of our knowledge infrastructure, and they will also have to play a key part in strengthening it. And I look forward to our discussion about that. With this in mind, I think it's high time to treat knowledge supply chains as critical infrastructure that underpins the democratic debate, without, of course, undermining or compromising freedom of expression. And our information sphere is, as I said, only a part of our democratic infrastructure that includes the rule of law, human rights, democratic freedom, with freedom to form our opinions as a key aspect of that. Some steps to boost our information sphere are already underway. Currently, a significant amount of energy is going into fixing the broken mirror, the technology that distorts our view of the world. That is necessary, of course, just as it is necessary to teach people how to recognize disinformation and show them how to do their own research, which is also part of the many proposed solutions to these challenges. But we also have to ensure that we have reliable content that can be made findable by the platforms, which, by the way, also includes not only Google, but also TikTok and Instagram. 40% of young people in the US use TikTok and Instagram as search engines. Supporting and boosting knowledge supply has the added benefit of not compromising our freedom of expression, because it works to strengthen and diversify our information sphere. The final report of the European Parliament's first Special Committee on Foreign Interference in all democratic processes, including disinformation, which was adopted in March, stated that pre-bunking, which means inoculating people against disinformation, and a healthy information ecosystem are far more effective than subsequent fact-checking and debunking efforts. The report also highlighted the importance of having easy and timely access to fact-based information from reliable sources when disinformation starts to spread. I think one could be even more ambitious and say that it's important to have access to fact-based information from reliable sources about potential future wedge issues, including history, including religion and identity, before the campaigns start to spread. And anyone who wants to do their own research should be able to find reliable sources in their mother tongue. We have seen Russia weaponize history to justify the war on Ukraine, and Ukrainian President Zelensky has asked for not only heavy weapons, but also for efforts to help Russians understand their own history to prevent future wars. And that should, of course, also be a part of the Russian language knowledge infrastructure going forward. By building bridges between academia, science, and people in a language that they can understand, and here I mean both in people's native languages, but also using language that is easy to grasp, verified and trusted encyclopedias, landmarks of knowledge like yours, can help bridge the past, the present, and the future, without us getting stuck in the mirror of Erised. You can help preserve national and cultural heritage help keep languages alive online, help create communities of knowledge that can be extended beyond the borders of Europe. I know that I've painted a somewhat gloomy picture against the backdrop of some of the developments in the past 3 years. Yes, there is no shortage of forces who work to divide us for monetary or geostrategic reasons. There is no shortage of forces that undermine trust in expertise. But we can boost the structures that unite us, that help us bridge the divides and help us share realities. We are seeing right now how nostalgia for the glorious and mythical past can destroy the future. Nostalgia is also desire spelled backwards. Putin, as so many other dictators before him, got stuck in his own mirror of Erised and tried to impose it not only on the rest of his country, but also on Ukraine and Europe. And the rest of Europe, sorry. That has prevented him and his compatriots from moving forwards. They are currently moving backwards in every possible way. I hope at some point that as President Zelensky has said, that I hope that at some point that Russians will be able to move forward, but as Ukrainian President Zelensky has said, that will require deeper understanding of their own history, and that requires sustainable knowledge supply chains in Russia as well. You asked in your welcome remarks, implicitly at least, the question, is knowledge still power? We know, and they know that we know, that knowledge is still power. Otherwise, why try to undermine it? In democracies, knowledge shared is power multiplied. A knowledge gap, on the other hand, is a power vacuum that will be filled by forces who have an ideological or commercial interest in doing so, if we don't fill it ourselves. The power of knowledge that you represent has the potential to fill the gaps and reach beyond Europe and the US. Knowledge diplomacy, if I may say, can take many forms, and encyclopedias can be one of them. I'll conclude by paraphrasing Martin Luther King, who's saying that, I'm paraphrasing him, attacks on the information sphere anywhere is an attack on the information sphere everywhere. It's often said that we are all in the same boat when it comes to defending democracy. That's only partly.
Said that I would like to thank Naja for this nice talk, which I'm sure will lead the way to and open the way to the discussions that we are going to have in these 2 days. And now I would like to open the floor for discussions.
Everybody's shy, so it's understandable for the beginning. I was just thinking when you were speaking about 2 things, which, in my opinion, are very interesting. One is that notion of information overload, and that's the notion that it has its practical consequences for us who are writing or publishing encyclopedias. I try to, in my welcoming address, just to touch it in one sentence, but how, let's say, beginning from the banal question of how long an article should be to be interesting for a consumer, for a reader. Should it be too long or too short, or how to find some sort of a middle ground to give information that we suppose the reader needs, but not to overload him with a bunch of information that he will lose the concentration. He says, oh no, I will not read that. I'm going to find another source, and maybe that source will not be the source of a verified knowledge, but a source of a false knowledge, in parentheses. The other thing, which is a kind of ironic, that when you were speaking, came to my mind is that both these great powers, military powers, China and Russia, although one is not so great as we see, have tried to have their own encyclopedias, their own encyclopedic platforms to counter the other sources of knowledge, which is in a way threatening, but it seems to me, and I'm saying this from the perspective of a historian of encyclopedia, like we are doing a circle. We are now at the beginning of the era of the modern encyclopedia, when encyclopedia was in effect a tool of changing the world. They are in fact trying to change the world, or maybe some sort of intellectual consensus, by giving their own versions of things that are mostly similar to, let's say, our encyclopedias, which is, I say, at the same time threatening in a way, but even from the optics of objective looker, in a historical perspective, it's a kind of even understanding. It's not. I'm not. Of course, I'm speaking here as a sort of advocatus diaboli, to be honest. That was those, and the third one, as you said that young people are consuming the information mostly via Instagram or TikTok, which are mostly visual media, and we are still mostly practicing a kind of a print media, but in a digital form mostly, yes. But does it mean that in, let's say, 10 to 20, 50 years, if our civilization becomes more and more visual one, we should be doing our encyclopedias in sort of TikTok, Instagram photographs, or TikToks, 15 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes thing to explain those new consumers the verified knowledge? I thank you that because you opened up so many questions, at least for me.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to comment at this stage?
We've been talking a lot about the TikTok format for an encyclopedia as well. I don't really believe it. I believe we can get the kids to actually read, and I think we have seen that it's actually possible to reach them via text. But I would like to just share. I was at this meeting with the Norwegian National Security Authority some weeks ago, which I thought was interesting, because they're talking about how they see a very different sort of Russian attack on information services and also political authorities. Like earlier, we would see a lot of hacking attempts, by us or other sort of large websites that would be, that would be quite late at day. It was quite apparent there were like guys in their sort of, they were on their own. They were obviously hired by someone, but they were on their own. It was, it didn't seem very organized. Now we see a very, very different pattern. We see that the attacks, and we are under like major attacks almost weekly, or at least every second week. They start around 8 in the morning. They change around noon, so they obviously go to lunch, which means that they will be in a place with a canteen. And then they come back, and the sort of attack change again around like 1. There's obviously like a new sort of a second shift coming on around 2 or 3. They have like a dinner break at 6. And this is, I think, is it's really, it's so institutionalized now. And I mean, they obviously they managed to attack the Norwegian Parliament last year. They got managed to hack email accounts of like 60 central politicians. And I mean, the stuff that we see is just like attacks. It's like trying to make us go down. We haven't seen any really hacking attempts, but it's like the professionalization of the attacks on political authorities and information sources, I think, is staggering. Yeah, I just want to share.
Yeah, I don't have a question, but thank you, Naja, for excellent presentation. But for those who haven't been in this encyclopedic movement from the very beginning, so I would like to remind that Naja is actually godmother or mother or actually key person for who initiated this encyclopedic cooperation. Absolutely. This is because of you.
Thank you.
And we are really happy you are continuing to follow what we are doing and participating with your advice, and it's really, it's worth. And we hope to continue to work with you together in the future as well. So thank you, Naja.
Thank you so much. That's very, very kind of you to say that. Do you want me to respond?
If you want to comment.
Maybe I'll do it in reverse order. First of all, say thank you very much to Walters for your very kind words. And then just to pick up on what you said, Eric, it sounds like they are working according to St. Petersburg time zone, because they get up quite early, right? If they start at 8, I think they work 9 to 5, because they start at, how much is the time difference? Is it 1 or 2 hours? It sounds like then they have a very early lunch break for our time, but for their time it's about 1, and then they come back at 2 from the canteen, as you said, and continue. I think that's in a way I think it's a positive sign, because it means that they're taking you seriously, and I think also what you said that this morning about people in our circles, well-educated people with access, professional access to highly developed and high-quality knowledge databases and sources that we don't have to pay for ourselves, because that's part of our job. That I think that we often forget that people who are affected by the current energy crisis, for example, financially, who have received an enormous energy bill, where do they cut expenses? They probably maybe stop subscribing to, if they already subscribe to quality news, then that might be on top of the list of luxury to scrap. And I think that even the thought of them potentially spending money on a private subscription to an encyclopedia is, I think we can, honestly, I don't think that's realistic. Coming back to your comment about they entered into the cooperation with Encyclopedia Britannica, which is of higher quality. So that was their quick fix. I'm not sure if it's efficient. I don't know. May I just one sentence on memes? We haven't talked about memes. That has become a critical component in information wars. The Ukrainians are actually fighting a meme war as we speak. And I've seen that this might be something for everyone to consider. I've seen actually one example from Denmark is a library, public library in Nørrebro that uses memes to present or communicate about the books that they offer, which is great. I think it's a great initiative, and it's very, very funny. So if you can check out their Instagram account, Nørrebro Bibliotek, I can send you the link. Did I cover everything?
I think so.
Well, we will have enough time to discuss all these things in the following session.
The next session.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Naja.
Thank you.